And then now, how successful or fruitful were the APEC Summit and the G20 Summit on the global level? Let's recap the past with Professor Hans Schattle. Good morning.
Good morning, Dami.
So let's start with the G20 Summit over in Rio. Is it safe to say one of the biggest outcomes of this year's edition is the launch of the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty? What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting and positive step. This G20 summit in particular was hosted, of course, in the global south with Brazil. Next year, it's apparently scheduled to be hosted by South Africa. And that's a big difference, actually, between the G20, this larger group, and, say, the G7, the smaller group of countries, mainly in the global north, that meet every year as well. And I think Lula da Silva, the president of Brazil, was very keen to make a statement at this summit that we could see more attention to issues in countries that still struggle for a lot of poverty. So there are some interesting steps in the alliance. Cash transfers for up to 500 million people around the world in developing countries that maybe don't have quite enough to eat. Malnutrition as well among school students is being taken on. School meals for 150 million students has been pledged in support from a variety of countries, as well as some support for small-scale farmers. So the big global NGOs are framing this as a positive step. And they are also calling for it to be a first step, not for it to be a final step. Oxfam in particular is suggesting that there's need for even more investments to get at agriculture itself and to promote more small-scale farming, promote more land rights in developing countries, promote more gender equity. So hopefully this will start a larger conversation on a lot of kinds of more systemic changes as well that could follow this sort of agreement and create more food for people around the world.
Right. Sounds like a tangible, start to the project, a global project. But at the same time, the G20 member countries sounded a note of, caution over protectionism regarding trade ahead of the launch of the incoming Trump administration, didn't they?
You bet, because Donald Trump, the incoming U.S. president, is already talking about tariffs, in some cases very steep tariffs, particularly on goods imported into the U.S. From China. And that prompted Chinese leader Xi Jinping to have a series of one-on-one meetings at the summit with presidents and prime ministers from a variety of countries, really urging them, I think lobbying them or pleading with them not to take the same kinds of protective steps, so to speak. In a way, it was kind of odd to see China, a communist country still, out there at the forefront of trying to position itself as a free trade country, as a country following what we would call neoliberalism. So they're really trying to, I think, protect their own industries, their own export industries, by trying to maintain better arrangements with other countries if they're going to have a less favorable arrangement with the U.S. So definitely the possibility or the likelihood now, or an inevitability, I guess, of the second Trump administration was a kind of shadow that was hanging over this summit.
Right, China trying to fit in a rare move. Now, of course, Ukraine's sovereignty and the denunciation of Russia-North Korea military collaboration also topped the summit. But Russia's foreign minister, who attended the meeting on behalf of Putin, left the summit with a stronger warning about the war in Ukraine. Now, it looks like Russia is nowhere close to ending its crisis, doesn't it?
Yeah, the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, which in many ways involves a lot of other countries, including G20 countries, was another dark cloud, you could say, over this summit. And, the Russia over the last few days has put out a new doctrine, supposedly, on its, prospective use of nuclear weapons, something that it's been threatening ever since it invaded Ukraine as a kind of blackmail in February of 2022. And what they're saying now is even if there are conventional attacks on Russia, basically attacks on Russia with non-nuclear weapons, such as the long-range missiles provided by the U.S. that Ukraine has been firing in to Russia this week, and Ukraine's also now been firing in missiles provided by Britain as well. Russia is saying, and they're warning in advance, that they are going to treat any attack on their territory, even if it's not a nuclear attack, if the attack is coming and aided by a state that is a nuclear state, then Russia will treat that state aiding them as also a party to the attack, a joint assault on Russia. So that's a kind of ominous statement. It's not necessarily a threat from Russia that they're actually going to respond to that kind of attack with nuclear weapons, but it suggests that Russia itself, as its own territory starts to get attacked by Ukraine, that they will consider at least escalating further and possibly escalating beyond what would be seen as proportionate. So that's an unresolved point of tension that really got no further in terms of progress at the summit, unfortunately.
Professor Schattle, before I let you go, a notable happening during the summit this year, U.S. President Joe Biden was tardy and it missed the so-called, family photo of the summit with the world leaders. It was unusual that the world leaders, didn't wait for Biden, considering Washington's status in the international arena. Is it because he's on the way out of the White House?
Well, it's unusual and it's a bit odd. It wasn't just Joe Biden in the end. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni also missed that first photo and almost opened up the question who was snubbing whom here. Were certain world leaders unhappy with the way the summit was going and they weren't showing up for the photo? Or on the other hand, were they the ones getting snubbed since the rest of the crowd didn't wait for them to come? I think it was a real headache, actually, for the host of the summit, Brazil's President Lula da Silva. He ended up scheduling a second photo shoot. It was overnight our time, and they did take that second picture with all of them there. But President da Silva of Brazil also canceled the final press conference where they would typically announce the results of the G20 summit. So even though there was that food security initiative that came out of the G20 this time around, it seemed that on all the larger issues in terms of trade, in terms of also Israel-Palestine, in terms of Russia and Ukraine, and even the positioning, but maybe in a way a kind of tension between some of the countries of the global north and the countries of the global south, it seems like all these fault lines or fissures are going to be lingering into next year's summit. So the leaders of South Africa have their work cut out for them as they get ready to host next year's G20.
Professor Schattle, thanks so much for your time and your insight this morning. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you for having me, Dami. You too. Take care.